There is something unsettling, almost frightening, about a woman who decides to walk alone. Not because she has been rejected, not because she has no one to lean on, but because she has consciously chosen solitude as a path of power. To most people, solitude looks like emptiness, like a lack of connection, like weakness. But to her, it becomes a source of transformation. Carl Jung understood this with profound clarity. He taught that the unconscious, the shadow, the inner self can only speak when the noise of the world quiets down. A woman who chooses to be alone is not escaping life. She is listening to life more deeply than ever before. Most people spend their lives entangled in expectations, in constant dialogue with others, in a never-ending performance to be liked, accepted, validated. From early childhood, women are often trained to define themselves through relationships, through care, through giving, through being present for everyone else. Rarely are they encouraged to turn inward and discover what waits in silence. That is why, when a woman refuses the constant pull of social validation, when she says no to the endless cycle of proving herself in front of others, she awakens a terrifying power. She begins to see through illusions that most people never question. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, could not happen in a crowd. It required the courage to face solitude, to stand alone with the unconscious and discover what lies hidden beneath the surface. For a woman, this solitude can feel radical. It challenges cultural expectations. It defies the roles she was told to play. It unsettles those around her because it reveals that she does not need constant external affirmation to know who she is. And that independence, that inner ground, makes her powerful in ways that frighten those who rely on her conformity. Solitude is not loneliness. Loneliness is hunger for others. Solitude is presence with the self. The woman who chooses solitude has learned that her own mind, her own body, her own soul can be a source of fascination, nourishment, and creativity. She is not empty when she is alone. She is full. She walks into the silence and discovers that she carries entire universes inside her. Jung would call this the dialogue with the unconscious, the encounter with the deeper self. It is in this dialogue that she begins to see truths about her life, her relationships, her desires, her fears. She begins to meet parts of herself that were long ignored in the rush to please others. People who have never tasted this kind of solitude cannot understand it. To them, being alone feels like abandonment, like boredom, like loss. They look at her and wonder if she is broken, if she is antisocial, if something is wrong. What they cannot see is that she has chosen this space deliberately, that she has cultivated the courage to be with herself without distraction. This terrifies them, because it forces them to confront their own dependency on noise, their own inability to sit in silence without anxiety. Her comfort in solitude exposes their discomfort. Her independence reveals their hidden dependence. Her strength shows them their own fragility. Carl Jung often warned of the dangers of living entirely through the persona, the mask we present to society. When life becomes only about how others see us, we lose contact with our deeper nature. A woman who chooses solitude strips away that mask. She is no longer living to be seen. She is living to see herself. That stripping away is frightening because it reveals truths that polite society prefers to hide. She sees where she has been manipulated by expectations. She sees where her desires have been shaped by culture rather than by her own soul. She sees the cost of playing roles that do not belong to her. In solitude, she begins to reclaim her authenticity. This is not an easy path. To stand alone is to face shadows. Jung taught that every encounter with the unconscious brings us into contact with both light and darkness. A woman in solitude meets her fears, her insecurities, her wounds, but she also meets her deepest strength, her intuition, her creativity. While others numb themselves in constant distraction, she sits in silence and allows the inner storm to rise. That storm refines her. It teaches her resilience. It awakens her insight. It burns away illusions until she can see with clarity. What emerges is a woman who no longer depends on the approval of the group, who no longer fears silence, who no longer runs from herself. And this independence makes her terrifyingly powerful. Watch how such women move through the world. They do not rush to fill every silence with words. They do not need to explain themselves in every room. They carry a quiet strength that unsettles those around them. Others may whisper that they are strange, cold, or too independent, but beneath those judgments lies fear. Fear of what they represent. Because if a woman can stand so completely alone, Then she proves that dependence is not destiny, that a different kind of life is possible, that freedom does not require constant attachment. She reveals the fragility of social illusions, and that revelation is uncomfortable to those still trapped in them. In solitude, she also discovers creativity. Jung insisted that the unconscious is the source of imagination, dreams, and inspiration. Solitude is the door through which those forces enter. Women who choose solitude often find themselves writing, painting, creating, dreaming in ways they never could when surrounded by constant noise. Their solitude becomes fertile ground. Out of silence, beauty is born. Out of stillness, new visions arise. They are no longer repeating what society has told them to be. They are discovering what they can create when they are fully themselves. And that originality is frightening to those who have settled for conformity. There is also wisdom. In their solitude, Jung spoke often of the archetypal feminine, the inner wisdom that comes not from logic alone but from intuition, from feeling, from deep connection to the rhythms of life. When a woman chooses solitude, she begins to hear that wisdom more clearly. She senses patterns others miss. She feels truths others ignore. She sees connections that others overlook. This wisdom can feel mysterious, even dangerous, to people who have not cultivated it. It unsettles those who live only on the surface, because it reveals depths that they are afraid to enter. Solitude also reshapes relationships. The woman who has chosen to be alone no longer enters connections out of desperation. She does not need someone to complete her, to define her, to distract her from herself. She chooses people consciously, from a place of fullness rather than emptiness. This makes her presence more powerful, because she is not bound by need. She can love freely, without losing herself. She can give without being consumed. She can connect without being trapped. This kind of freedom is terrifying to those who rely on her compliance. It shifts the balance of power. It reveals that true intimacy requires two whole people, not one person dissolving into another. Jung warned that most people avoid individuation because it demands sacrifice. It demands letting go of illusions. It demands facing the unconscious, confronting the shadow, embracing solitude. A woman who accepts this demand becomes different from those around her. She no longer fits into the comfortable molds. She no longer plays the predictable roles. Her independence threatens the systems that expect her obedience, and that is why her power is called terrifying. Not because she intends harm, but because she cannot be controlled by the usual means. She has stepped out of the game. She has learned to belong to herself. The terrifying power of women who choose to be alone is not in their rejection of society, but in their refusal to be defined by it. They prove that happiness, strength, and wisdom can be found within, without constant validation. They embody Jung's insight that the most valuable treasures of the psyche are discovered in solitude, in silence, in the willingness to face oneself. They remind us that the greatest danger is not being alone but never meeting the self that waits in the depths of our own mind. Her solitude is not weakness. It is her crucible. It is where she burns away illusions, where she confronts her shadows, where she discovers her authentic power. And when she returns from that solitude, she carries something rare, a presence that cannot be shaken, a wisdom that cannot be silenced, a strength that cannot be controlled. This is why she is terrifying to those who fear the depths. She has gone where they dare not go, and she has returned whole. Before we continue, if you feel the silent call to step back from the noise, the Jung Method can guide you. The link is pinned in the first comment. The terrifying power of a woman who chooses to be alone is not just about her independence. It is about the transformation that solitude makes possible. In silence, she learns to witness the movements of her inner world. She begins to see how much of her life was shaped by external expectations. She sees how the mask she wore to please others has kept her from living authentically. She sees the ways she once abandoned herself for approval. In solitude, those illusions fall apart. What remains is raw, unfiltered, and real. And from that truth, her real power begins to grow. Carl Jung described the shadow as the part of ourselves that we refuse to see, the aspects we push down into the unconscious because they feel too uncomfortable or unacceptable. Most people never meet their shadow because they drown it out with constant social interaction. But the woman who chooses solitude cannot escape it. Alone, she hears its whispers. Alone, she feels its weight. Alone, she must face the truths about herself that she once avoided. And yet, this confrontation does not weaken her. It refines her. By meeting her shadow, she integrates what was lost. She becomes whole. This is one of the reasons why her presence feels so powerful. She no longer projects her shadow onto others. She no longer hides from her darkness. She owns it, and in doing so, she becomes unshakable. Watch carefully, and you will see the difference. A woman who has avoided solitude is restless. She seeks constant confirmation from those around her. She fears silence because silence brings her face to face with herself. But a woman who has embraced solitude moves differently. She can sit in silence without fear. She can stand in a room without needing to be the center. She does not require constant reassurance. She does not crumble when others disapprove. That strength is terrifying because it reveals a kind of freedom that cannot be controlled. Solitude also gives birth to a deeper form of intuition. Jung described intuition as the function of the psyche that perceives possibilities and truths beyond logic. For most people, intuition is drowned out by noise, by constant chatter, by the opinions of others. But in solitude, intuition grows louder. A woman who listens to her own silence begins to hear the subtle movements of her inner world. She notices the quiet signals of her body, the whispers of her dreams, the symbolic language of her unconscious. This intuition becomes a compass, guiding her toward decisions that others may not understand, but that she knows are true. This is part of her terrifying power. She does not need external approval, because she trusts the wisdom that arises from within. This independence often unsettles those around her. People who rely on her conformity may accuse her of being selfish, cold, or distant. But what they cannot see is that she is living from a different center. She is not driven by the constant need to be liked. She is not trapped by the fear of rejection. She is guided by an inner compass that points toward authenticity. And authenticity has a power that artificial approval can never match. In solitude, she also discovers creativity. Jung often said that the unconscious is the wellspring of creativity. Alone, a woman can access images, symbols, and visions that rise from depths beyond rational thought. She may write, paint, sing, or create in ways that surprise even herself. These creations are not made to impress others. They are born out of necessity, as expressions of her soul. This makes them powerful, because they are true, and truth, once expressed, carries a force that cannot be denied. When such a woman returns to the world after solitude, she carries something rare. She does not come back empty. She comes back with insight, with strength, with a voice that resonates, because it comes from silence. People may not always understand her, but they feel her presence. They sense that she has seen something they have not. And that sense creates both admiration and fear. Admiration, because her courage is inspiring. Fear, because her independence challenges the fragile illusions that others cling to. Relationships transform under this power. She no longer chooses out of fear of being alone. She no longer accepts less than what resonates with her soul. She does not demand perfection from others, but she demands authenticity. And because she has met herself in solitude, she is no longer afraid of walking away if a connection requires her to abandon herself. This makes her love more real, because it comes from freedom rather than need. It makes her presence more magnetic, because she does not beg for attention. She can walk into love as a whole person, not as someone searching for completion. And that is terrifying to those who once relied on her compliance. Jung wrote that the journey of individuation is not about becoming perfect, but about becoming whole. Wholeness requires solitude. It requires the courage to step back from the collective and face the self directly. A woman who accepts this journey carries the mark of depth. She has seen into herself and survived. She has walked through the wilderness of her own mind and returned with treasures that cannot be taken from her. That is why her solitude makes her powerful. The terrifying power of women who choose to be alone is not a threat to others, though it is often perceived as one. It is a threat to illusions. It is a threat to the systems that depend on her obedience. It is a threat to the belief that a woman must always be defined by others to have value. When she refuses those illusions, she exposes them for what they are. She reveals that a woman can be whole, strong, and wise without needing to perform the roles that culture demands of her. That revelation is enough to unsettle the world around her. This power does not mean she rejects connection. On the contrary, solitude makes her capable of deeper connection. Because she has learned to be with herself, she can be with others more authentically. Because she no longer fears loneliness, She no longer clings desperately to relationships, because she is grounded in her own center. She can meet others from a place of strength, rather than dependency. This is why the love of such a woman feels so different. It is not rooted in fear. It is rooted in freedom. The path of solitude also teaches her the economics of attention. Jung spoke about psychic energy, the finite amount of attention and vitality. Each person has. Most people waste this energy on constant social interactions, on endless distractions, on the performance of fitting in. But a woman who chooses solitude guards her energy carefully. She knows her attention is precious. She spends it on what matters. She invests it in her growth, her creativity, her inner development. This conservation of energy makes her sharper, more focused, more capable of creating something meaningful. People may not understand why she withdraws, but they feel the impact of what she produces. There is also a spiritual dimension to her solitude. Jung often explored the archetype of the wise woman, the one who carries knowledge from the depths of the unconscious. Solitude is the doorway through which she enters that archetype. Alone, she begins to hear the voice of something greater than herself. She senses patterns in her life that connect to universal truths. She begins to feel her place in a larger story. This spiritual awareness gives her a presence that others feel, even if they cannot name it. It is the aura of someone who has touched the depths and returned with wisdom. This presence unsettles because it cannot be faked. You cannot pretend to have walked through solitude. You cannot imitate the authenticity of someone who has faced herself and emerged whole. That is why the power of these women feels terrifying. It carries the weight of truth. It carries the strength of someone who has stopped running. It carries the silence of someone who has listened deeply to the unconscious and learned to trust. The world does not easily accept women who carry this power. They are often misunderstood, judged, or even feared. But their existence is essential. They remind us of what is possible. They show that solitude is not a prison, but a path to liberation. They embody Jung's insight that the most valuable treasures of the psyche are hidden in places that require courage to enter. They prove that the highest strength is not in pleasing others, but in meeting oneself with honesty. The terrifying power of women who choose to be alone is ultimately the power of authenticity. It is the power of saying yes to the self, even when the world demands no. It is the power of silence in a culture addicted to noise. It is the power of depth in a world obsessed with appearances. It is the power of freedom in a society built on conformity. That power unsettles because it cannot be bought, controlled, or broken. It belongs only to her, and she carries it with quiet certainty. The next time you see a woman who walks comfortably, in her own solitude, who does not rush to fill her life with noise, who carries herself with a strength that does not depend on others, remember what you are witnessing. You are seeing someone who has faced her shadow, who has listened to her unconscious, who has chosen the path of individuation. You are seeing a woman who has discovered that solitude is not emptiness, but fullness, not weakness, but strength, not fear, but freedom. And that is why her power is terrifying. It is a power that comes from within, a power that no one can take, a power that transforms everything it touches.